Welcome to Geveracom, where the wise get wiser. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the fourth letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And we're going to be looking at the forms, how it's written, a few key aspects of the letter. And we're also going to look at a few key words that start with this letter, such as the name David, and also the word for word, as in the word of the Lord. Of course, those are very important terms in the Hebrew Bible. And we're also going to take a look at and read a couple key verses, one from 2 Kings and one from Proverbs 4. Now, you might be surprised at how these two verses are related and just how important they actually are. So let's go ahead and get wise. All right, well, let's go ahead and start talking about our fourth letter, the letter Dalet. And we're going to take a look at the alphabet as a whole and also some forms here. But before we get into the letter, I did just want to give us a little bit of a word of encouragement, maybe a word of reminder about what we're doing here. So as we'll look and find out about the word for word in the Bible, the term davar, we should be reminded just of how important the word of the Lord really is and how we are called not to depart from it. Actually, in Deuteronomy and in Revelation, they both say and emphasize that you should not add or subtract from the word of the Lord. And so really the goal and the task of what we're trying to do here is to better understand what the Lord has already said. And this is very important because we're limited as humans. We can't know everything. We only know such a small portion of all that is, right? But God knows, and we can trust Him, and we can trust His word. And so the word of the Lord is key for us in understanding what it means to be human, what it means to follow in the ways of the Lord. And so as we learn Hebrew, we should always be reminded of why we're doing this. And that's to better understand what God has told us so that we can truly understand Him more and love Him more, and to love others and serve the Lord how He would want us to. Well, let's go ahead and learn a little bit about this fourth letter. So the fourth letter is Dalet, and let's practice our alphabet just a little bit before we get into our letter Dalet. So I'm going to do it quickly, as you probably have suspected at this point. So I recommend taking out a piece of paper and a pen and practicing and following along. So I'm going to do it quickly here. So we have, first here, we have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ain, Te, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Ta. All right. So let's do them a little more slowly. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ain, He, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right. So let's do it a little more quickly together. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right, so that's the alphabet. Hopefully it's starting to feel a little better. So let's talk about our fourth letter, the Dalet. Dalet. And we're going to look at how it's written. So first of all, as we see here, there's the space of the letter. And so the first stroke should probably be this top piece. And as it will be a little more apparent and important to know for other letters, the Dalet is a nice straight or square top piece. And then you add this vertical piece, right? So top part, then the down part. And as we'll actually see here with our keywords, the letter Dalet is related to the word for a door, So just remember that doors are square, at least normally, unless you live in a hobbit town where they're rounded. But in most houses, doors are nice and square. So remember that as you learn and recall the letter Dalet. Again, this will be important when we come across some other letters that are similar, but are not nice and square like the Dalet. Okay, well, we can also look at a few of the fonts and the ways that you might see it come across. So this is, of course, our nice, fancy, biblical version of the letter Dalet. But you might see a bit more simplified form, such as this one, where it's just very square and plain. This one is also kind of similar, but a little bit more skinny, but much more simplified, again, than our fancy biblical form. And we can also briefly mention about the history of the Dalet letter. So if you notice here, in the Proto-Sinaitic form, again, that ancient early form, probably from about the time of the Judges to maybe as early as Abraham, this was, what do you think this picture is? I think this is probably the easiest one to guess. This is the picture for a fish. And in ancient times, the word was dag. And so the word for fish, dag, starts with that D sound, duh. And so the word for fish was associated with that sound. However, as you might imagine, trying to draw a fish every time you wanted to write the letter D would be a little bit time-consuming. So over time, it got simplified so that in our Paleo-Hebrew form, as you see here, it really just becomes kind of a triangle type shape. And in that triangle shape, as you can see here, it has sort of the sense of a fish, right? It's kind of like if you were to draw a fish. Oops. All right. If you were to draw a fish a whole bunch of times, eventually it would start to look a little bit like a triangle, right? And so that's pretty much what happened. It just got simplified. What's interesting, though, is that actually, as we've mentioned before, the Paleo-Hebrew and the ancient Greek were actually related and very similar. And so the ancient Hebrew letter for D or Dalet was the ancient Greek letter for delta, the D in ancient Greek. So very interesting how they are related. All right, well, we can learn a couple other things about the Hebrew letter Dalet. So first of all, the sound is like a D, duh, as in door or dog. However, as you notice here, the Dalet also is one of those letters with a dot, or it can have a dot, but it can also be written without the dot. Now, this might feel a little bit confusing at this point since we've learned only 4 letters now, and 3 of them have this dot, at least as an option. Now, this is actually not super common. Most of the letters do not have this dot option, okay? But it just happens that 3 of the first 4 letters do. but there's actually only 3 more throughout the rest of the Hebrew alphabet. Now, just like with the Gimel, at least in modern times, the Dalet is just the same in sound. It's just the D sound, whether it's with the dot or without the dot. Now, in ancient times, in biblical times, there's a high likelihood that they did sound a little different. Probably, again, with the dot, more of a D sound, that strong D plosive sound. And without the dot, probably a bit more like a the or Z sound. Again, it's hard to say for sure because we don't have any recordings from ancient times. But the fact that the rabbis wrote these different forms implies that there was a pronunciation tradition that was being passed on. So we can also mention that, as you might suspect, the Dalet serves as the number 4 at times. So, for instance, if again you had Genesis chapter 4, it would have been written as Bereshit Dalet. Bereshit Dalet, Genesis 4. So Dalet is our number 4. Well, let's go ahead and talk about a few of our key words. Well, one of the first and best places to start with the letter Dalet is the very famous King David. King David, right? So his name is David. 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 And this is the name David. So let's look at another one. We also see here the word Derek. 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 And this word is pronounced with an emphasis on the front part. So it's Derek. Derek. Okay? And Derek is actually a very important and key word, which can mean road, way, or path. Now, in many of its uses, it's simply just a road or a path, right? Nothing special, so to speak. But it often gets used in the sense of like the way of life, the way or choices that a person makes, right? You can either go left or right or straight in your actions, in your deeds. And as we'll see, there's kind of this implication for either following the Lord wholly in the sort of straight and narrow way, or going off into your own way, and which ultimately is metaphorical for evil or sin. All right, now we can look at another really, really important word in the Hebrew Bible, and that's our words davar and davar. Davar and davar. So these actually sound the same. Da-var. Da-var. Now, we haven't learned the vowels yet. We will soon. But you'll notice that this one has these 2 vowels that are the same. And this one has 2 that are a little different. And they sound the same. But the one on the right here, davar, is the noun version, meaning a word, or sometimes a thing, or more generically like matter or something, stuff. But it is the one that's very commonly used in the sense of the word of the Lord. So this is very, very, very important. There's another one here on the left that is the verb form. And this one is meaning to speak. To speak. He spoke. And this one, of course, is often used, just generically for anyone who speaks, but oftentimes, again, with the Lord speaking a command or a word to the people. So both of these end up being very important words. We also have the word dam. Dam. And dam is the word for blood. Blood. And if you remember, of course, blood was very important in the ancient tradition for the temple and for sacrifice, which was really also a part of covenants as well. And so even in the New Testament, The book of Hebrews even mentions that there is no forgiveness of sins without the shedding of blood. All right. And so this is why it was so important for Jesus to actually bleed, to shed his blood. And so a lot of really interesting and important theology that comes along with this word for blood, dam. And we can also see here our word, Dalet, Dalet. Sometimes I get confused here because it's related to the letter Dalet, but this one is actually Dalet. And so this one literally means door, and Dalet is just the letter, but they're related, of course. So Dalet is the word for a door. And so like I said, doors are nice and square. So remember that as you're remembering or learning this letter D, Dalet. And then finally here, we have the word door. Door. Now, this is the Hebrew word door, not the English word door. So door in Hebrew actually means generation or like a period of time. And so this often is very important in genealogies, in prophecies, remembering back on the generations, right? And so door means generation. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about our verses for today. As I mentioned, we're going to be looking at 2 Kings from chapter 22 in verse 2. And this is actually our introduction to Josiah from 2 Kings. So if you remember, Josiah was basically the last great faithful king of Judah, really of the entirety of Israel, because there was exile, and then really the monarchy never fully was restored, at least not until, as we would think, theologically and spiritually through Christ. But Josiah was only 8 years old when he began reigning as king. So anyways, we find this verse here in chapter 22. So let's go ahead and read it together. So we have Va-Ya'as, Ha-Yashar, Ha-Yashar. So let's do a little slower here. Va-Ya-As, Va-Ya-As. Ha-Yashar, Ha-Yashar, Vayas, Ha-Yashar. So let's look at these words. So the or va is our word and, which we've seen quite a few times. And we have Ya'as, which means he did. So, and he did Ha-Yashar, which means upright or uprightly. So he did uprightly or properly, we might even say in English. All right. Now we can look at our second part of the verse here. So we have Be'enei Adonai Vayelek. Be'enei Adonai Vayelek. Be'enei Adonai Vayelek. So Be'enei Adonai Vayelek. All right, so let's look at these words here. Well, we see here our preposition be again. So at this point, you're hopefully noticing how common this is. Be, and what does that mean? That's right, it means in, with, by, among. And then here we have the word for eyes or eyes of. Ein, enei, ayin, for the eyes. So enei, eyes of the Lord. So in the eyes of the Lord. And then we have again va, which means and. And then we have yelek, which means to like walk or to go. And so here we have and he walked or went. Also used more kind of metaphorically in the sense of lived, right? So he conducted himself. Like I said, this metaphor of derek or way is very commonly just used in the sense of the way of your life, the way that you live. And so we can see in this verse here that he, Josiah, did what was right or upright, proper in the eyes of the Lord. And he walked or went Bekol, Derek, David. Bekol, Derek, David. Bekol, Derek, David. All right, so what are these words? Well, again, we see this preposition, be, which means in, with, by, among. All right, so in or with, probably, probably here in, and then kol, which is the word for all or the whole, and then derek, which we learned just a minute ago. So what does derek mean? It means the way, right? Or the path. And then our famous name here, David, King David. So in other words, in the whole way of David, So he walked or went in the whole way of David. So this is a very key passage again, relating Josiah to his ancestor, David. So basically saying that he was imitating and reflecting the ways of David. Now, of course, David wasn't perfect, but David did listen to the word of the Lord and trusted in the Lord. So even though he would fail and sin and fall short of the glory of God, he was always quick to repent and to trust in the Lord and to never deviate from the word of the Lord. And so we're actually going to see that here in the rest of our verse. So it mentions here, Aviv, 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 Velo, Velo, Sar, Sar, Aviv, Velo, Sar. And this means Av, father, and then this addition here means his. So his father. So he walked in the whole way of David, his father. Again, a very, very important and key metaphor that someone is called the son of somebody that they are like, that they imitate. Right? So Josiah is a son of his father David, meaning that he was like him. He reflected him. We also see this similarly used of other bad kings who are said to have walked in the way of their father, who was Jeroboam, right? The idolater and the one who departed from the word of the Lord. And so they were sons of their father. And Jesus even uses this as a rebuke to some of the religious leaders, right? He said that your father is the devil, which would have been a very well-known metaphor used at the time, meaning they are just like, they imitate and reflect the ways of the devil, a liar and a murderer, and whose ways are crooked and twisted and never follow the word of the Lord. And so this is a very high honor to say that Josiah walked in the way of King David, his father. And then it goes on here to say, the lo, and not, or and he did not, sar, which means to turn. And he did not turn, yamin, yamin, u, semol. Yamin u semol. Yamin u semol, which means right, and, or we could say or here, left. Yamin is right. Semol means left, as in right hand, left hand. And as you can see here, that and, sometimes written the, sometimes written va, and in here written as u, can mean and, but it can also mean or. And there's actually a few other things that we might say in English to sound good. But just like the be, right? That be can mean in, with, by, among, and perhaps some other words that we would use in English. The ve is kind of similar in that it catches a whole lot of different ways or phrases that we might use in English. All right, so again, he did not turn, Josiah did not turn right or left. Right or left. So in other words, he walked in the full way of David, his father, not turning left or right. Now, as we see in other places and understand this this phrase, this terminology, it's used by Moses in Deuteronomy. It's also used by Josiah. And both of those are in regard to the word of the Lord, walking according to the Torah, the instructions, the commands, the laws, right, from God. And so Josiah and David and Joshua and Moses are all those who are said to have walked in the way of the Lord, in the word, according to the word of the Lord, and didn't depart right or left, right? The straight and narrow. And that is a key idea, metaphor throughout the Bible and for us. So we actually find this similar phrase used in Proverbs. So let's look at Proverbs 4 now. So we see here, al, tet, yamin, u, semol. U, semol. Al, tet, yamin, u, semol. So again, more slowly. Al, tet, ya, min, u, se, mol. All right. So this means all is not or no. So we saw a different version of this just in the previous verse, lo. So all and lo are very similar. Lo means no, and all also means no or not. And then tet is a word that means to turn or to depart. And so this is saying do not depart or turn. Okay, so this is from Proverbs, and this is the father speaking to the son, saying don't turn. Yamin, right. U, or semol, left. Do not turn right or left. In other words, stay true to the whole way of your father David. Stay true to the whole way of Joshua and Moses according to the word of the Lord. And the parallel is given here in the next part. Haser, rag leka, mera. Haser, rag leka, mera. So slower. Ha, ser, rag, le, ka, me, ra. Chaser ragleka mera. All right. So what do these words mean? So haser is, as you probably remember hearing from 2 Kings, right? 22, where it was the word turn. It was in that verse, sar, he did not turn. Lo sar, he did not turn. And here, this is again the command. So do not turn. And so this ha in this place is actually a part of the command component of this passage. And we'll learn more about the grammar down the road. But it's not the word the here. It's just a part of the command form. So do not turn. And then we have ragleka. So we can look at this ka first. we've seen this before. This means you or your, right? So do not turn your, and this is actually the word regel, meaning foot, or here ragleka, your foot. So do not turn your foot. Mera. And then me is from. And then ra is evil or bad or trouble or wickedness. So do not turn your foot from evil. In other words, don't be influenced or go astray, right? Don't turn left or right. Stay true to the word of the Lord. And it's literally kind of comparing it to both wandering off the path in this kind of imagery, right? Your foot leaving the path, but also in the sense of leaving the word of the Lord is evil and wickedness. As we had mentioned from early on in Deuteronomy to Revelation 22, there's a strong emphasis not to add or subtract from the word of the Lord. The word of the Lord is what we live by, right? We don't live on bread alone, but by every word that has come from the mouth of the Lord. And that is our sustenance, because this world is uncertain and unclear. And so we can't know how things will be, but we listen to and we trust the God who knows the end from the beginning. We trust the God who is the very essence of wisdom and knowledge, and we seek to be like him. And so that comes with listening to him and following in his way, just as Josiah did, just as David did, and Joshua and Moses, and so many others. And so hopefully we can also be an example to others, that we too would be an example and a witness of those who don't add or subtract from the word, who study diligently in order to understand simply what God has already said, and not to speculate and go off on crazy tangents, but to stay true to what God has said and be an example to others. Well, let's go ahead and finish up with a review of our alphabet. So hopefully it's getting a little bit more familiar, and you might even be able to do this on your own without me. So we have here Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ayin, He, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right. Well, that's the letter Dalet, and I hope you have learned a few things, and that you will cherish and honor the word of the Lord and declare it to other people who are also in desperate need of hearing the word of God and its transformative power in their life. We'll see you next time.